Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Kyle Alexander Reid, From the Fifth Floor. Kyle Alexander Reid is an American singer, songwriter, and fellow YouTube music content creator, someone who I really look up to and enjoy videos from. Someone who I've also had the pleasure of sharing conversation with, and I am very honored to at least have had some interaction with him, and I hope that can only grow going forward. But I actually had no idea of his music until very recently with the announcement of his newest album of his, From the Fifth Floor. So I figured, why not give it a look and see what the man can do? So, let's not waste any more time, let's just dive in. What are my thoughts on From the Fifth Floor? Let's find out as I review it track by track. We will start with the singles, with there only being one, that being Big Beautiful Dance, which starts off with these skipping energetic thumps of percussion, warbly guitar flashes, and a persistent humming bass foundation underneath it all. While it's not my favorite instrumental on the album, it does highlight one of the best elements of the record, and that is the meticulous crafting of said instrumentals. We'll dive more into that scene with later songs, but on this one it is very well produced and easily the best part of the song, as the vocals and their melodies don't really measure up. He's completely drenched in this odd vocal modifier. Not necessarily pitch changing or anything like that, but it makes him sound very distant on the more stripped back segments and echoey and hazy as all hell on the more fleshed out moments. Thankfully, the outro of this track is predominantly instrumental, which is nice, and the little sprinkles of vocals make it a far more tolerable experience than earlier when he follows typical verse-chorus-verse structure and the onslaught of those vocals. If that's the vibe he was intentionally going for, cool, I'm glad he sought it out and got it, but when it comes to my overall enjoyment, I think it's a real hit or miss factor. Now for the rest of the tracks. Opener The Parking Lot Kids begins with this gorgeous instrumental. I really love this tinny metallic strikes of percussion paired with the watery bass line and sunny synth licks. It has an impeccable groove to it, especially when the track continues to build up with more prominent cymbals and harsher synthwork conclusions. Very enjoyable instrumental all around, and Kyle's vocals are actually very well done on this one. Of course, they're still heavily lathered in this filter that I still don't really click with, but I think the actual tone of them and the particular melody he dances with is more than enough to ignore that facet. I think it's a great opener. Halloween or Something yet again instantly grips me with the instrumental. Reminds me of some of those 2000s alt-rock bands with the sharp guitar playing and smooth percussion, which I actually think helped make this track a highlight on the record. The vocal melody in question is also nice, but yet again what's preventing me from fully loving it is just how the vocals are done. They're just hit or miss. On the better end they're pretty tolerable, like on the opening moments or about halfway through when everything gets stripped down, including the effects, or if he's just cooing a simple melody on an instrumental passage. However, any other part of the track, especially the chorus, does get a little bit annoying. Despite that though, this track doesn't feel like nearly 8 minutes long. It does drag slightly, but not terribly at all. Honestly, I've heard a lot worse. Skater People instantly presents a scratchier, kind of punkish beat. The riffs are gritty, shrieking, and intense, the percussion has a much quicker pace, and the whole thing is wrapped up in a dense cocooning compression. While I can definitely see this being a bit too abrasive of a track for some, I really like this one, and I'm also very partial to the vocals on this track, which surprised me quite a lot. The melody is very satisfying, the lyrics flow together quite well, which couldn't be said about some of the earlier tracks like Halloween or Something. They kind of play to this obnoxious side of Kyle's voice, which could absolutely be a bother for some, but I think it pairs pretty well with the zaniness of the instrumental, especially on the bridge and choruses. Easy highlight of the album, one of my favorites, also immaculate transition into the next track, by the way. New Light manages to pull through with back-to-back great songs. I love the catchiness of this dense percussive pound-clap rhythm, simply trotting along the entire track, whether it's in the forefront like the opener or just providing a melodic backbone on the final moments. However, my favorite part of the track is just the awe-inspiring evolution it undergoes, letting some shrill, glitchy elements gradually blossom along with a frothy bass blanket, slowly building more and more with proper drums, soaring synths, and an overall grandiose feel. For the shortest track on the record, it sure shines on its own. I also really like Kyle's vocal usage on this song. They're relatively scarce and for the most part are often smothered by the instrumental, but they add their own touch as Kyle practically fuses with this beat as the track draws to its conclusion. Another one of my favorites. Waiting for the Coffee is a different style of track. It's almost got a hip-hop step to it. The stop and start rhythm of the percussion combined with the frantic layered synth work ranging from wiggly, zippy repetitions to flatter, more dissipated cloaks. This is a very dense song. Pretty much everything in the mix is very thick, especially as the track continues to grow and sprout into the back half. It almost just becomes this wall of sound, but still having a tangible bit of harmony. Unfortunately, the streak of enjoyable vocals comes to an end with this track, as the performance here is a bit more hit or miss. Starts out well enough, but I find there's a few moments where the melody gets a bit clunky, and unlike previous tracks, he doesn't manage to blend in with the enveloping instrumental as well, instead standing out in a craggy way, I suppose. Despite that, I still do like this one. I think it stands out on its own well enough. It's just not my favorite. I'm Gonna Get There starts off in the most fascinating way with this almost marching band-esque drum pattern, followed by this kind of vintage perambulating synth motif. Almost feels like something I'd hear in an Atari-style video game, all of a sudden transforming into a plunkier, kind of minimalistic hybrid of the two, accented by a bass lick. It is such a weird instrumental, and I adore it. I feel like the vocals in this one are much more enjoyable. The falsettos are kind of right where my limit is, especially on the part right before the halfway point where the vocal effects are just amplified tenfold. It becomes a little bit much, but the general melody and flow of his voice are performed well enough. Frankly, I'm just glad that despite the vocals dominating a bulk of the song, there's just no cramped feeling in the delivery. I can't say this is a song I am eager to revisit. I do find the final minute of the song a bit grating to sit through on multiple listens, but the instrumental is interesting enough to where I can't dislike it. When the Stars Disappeared changes things from the predominantly rock-focused direction of the album so far, with this being a more slow, warm, plunderphonics track for like the first minute and a half. And then we actually get to the meat of the song with far more electronic elements, the keyboard, little synth motifs, bigger synth flourishes later on, all bound up by the stagnant percussion as the track slowly increases in volume and intensity over the nearly 8-minute long runtime. Out of all the tracks on the album, I think this song has my favorite usage of vocals. While there still are some ugly moments regarding the filter, the effects, some of the melodies in particular pretty much make me forget all the bad, and they are more plentiful than the negative moments. Honestly, this is my favorite track on the album. My Heart is unfortunately a song I'm pretty torn on. It starts out nice enough with this lingering, crunchy wave of synth and the muted beating of percussion. I'm also pretty okay with Kyle's vocals. I think the tone of them plays very well to the simple, kind of bluish instrumental. What irks me about this song is pretty much everything else. After the first minute and a bit, the richer, more authentic drum pattern starts up that is in a completely different tempo and changes the entire vibe of the track. It is one of the most jarring moments on this album, and I am not a fan. Also, the entire back half is loaded with these kind of glitchy, sporadic voices over the stagnant instrumental, save for some additional synth flourishes, and it gets repetitive pretty quickly. I could honestly leave this track, probably my least favorite. And finally, the closer, Back to Life, the longest track here, just shy of 8.5 minutes, and this is a pretty solid way to end the album. I love the way this track starts off with this jittery percussive diorama, only to grow with this chilly synth melody. The instrumental mostly stays the same, except for a few moments with some added volume, layers, or a brief breakdown, and while I'm not typically fond of that for longer tracks, this one goes by surprisingly quickly. Kyle's vocals are pretty much the centerpiece of the song as a result, and yes, even though I'm not crazy about the effects and whatnot, but again, this one has great melodies to make up for that. The song also shares a common trait with the previous track, My Heart, that uses these vocal snippets from elsewhere and just begins to repeat them at different points throughout the song. Wasn't crazy about that on My Heart, and to be honest, I'm not crazy about it here, but all in all, a solid outro. Overall, I'm pretty glad I got the chance to check out From the Fifth Floor. This is a very solid time. I'll be the first to admit right now that this album is certainly a grower. Some tracks still haven't quite gotten to that level of positive from me yet, but I'm especially in awe of some of the genre experimentation and killer production and instrumental work on this record. I do think the album does have genuine flaws, and I think some elements here are going to be very off-putting for the average listener, but at the end of the day, I'm just glad I came around on this one. I'm feeling a 6 out of 10 on the album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.